I'm so glad you're joining us today. We're in the middle of a series called I Can't Believe in a God Who. So if you're joining us in Barrie, in Aurelio, you're watching live online, I'm glad you're here. For those of you who joined us at our locations today, you got a stone when you came in there. Did you find it sitting there? And I find myself in a very precarious position as a preacher today. All of you are armed. And you look very dangerous. So I will try not to offend you deeply today because it could go very bad very fast. We're going to come back to this, but what we're doing over this season in the life of our church is we're thinking about all the reasons why people have decided not to trust God. For some of you, it's like, I'm not trusting God, period. I don't even know whether I believe in God. But there are always specific reasons attached to that. There are reasons you don't believe in God. And for even those of us who follow Jesus, for those of us who consider ourselves Christians, there are things about God's character, things about Christianity that bother us and probably even get in the way of our deep level of trust in God. In other words, okay, I trust you, I believe you're real, but like, how come you're like this? And whenever there are impediments in a relationship, the relationship never goes as deep and never realizes the potential it has. And so we want to go through sort of the top objections a lot of people have to Christianity. And you helped us with this. We actually sent out a survey a couple of months ago before we did this series, and we asked you, what are the things about God that you have a hard time believing? And you told us, and so we're teaching through them over 7 weekends. So this is where we started. Some of you said, hey, I can't believe in a God who doesn't answer my questions. That was part 1 of this series. And if you want to go back, all of this is available on our website, Connexus Church. Just click Watch on Demand, and you'll find all of these messages available. They're also on our audio and video podcasts on iTunes, which you can access for free. So I talked about that. Why doesn't God answer our questions? And what happens when we see God and our questions change? Second part of the series, we looked at this. I can't believe in a God who lets good people suffer. If God is good, if God is loving, why does he allow people to suffer? We looked at that one. Then we looked at this. I can't believe in a God who won't tell me what his will for my life is. For those of you who maybe haven't made a decision about Jesus, you frame the question this way. You're like, okay, if there is a God, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? We think God has an answer to that, and we think he's revealed it. And for those of you who are Christians, you're so frustrated because you've tried to figure out what God wants you to do, and you don't know what God wants you to do. I think the Bible reveals what we assume is concealed, and we looked at that. And then last week, probably a very challenging week, at least if you're the preacher, I can't believe in a God who kills innocent children in the Old Testament. A lot of you feel that way. What is the deal with the Old Testament? And why is God so violent? And why do children get killed? And how can that even be reconciled with any rational belief? And so we waded into that last weekend. The next weekend when we come back, we've got probably the leading New Testament scholar alive today who's going to join us right here at Connexus Church live, and I'm going to interview him about the Bible, because a lot of you want to believe in God, but you're like, okay, how do we even know the Bible is trustworthy? It's an ancient book. I mean, maybe it's not even what actually happened. How do we know Jesus actually lived? How do we know that what we read today as the Bible is actually what was written? And how do we know it's accurate? Because a lot of you can't believe in a God who picked a faulty, this is what you think, faulty Bible to communicate with us. If that is your issue, you're going to want to hear what Dr. Craig Evans has said. He has lectured at Harvard, at Yale, at Oxford, at Cambridge. He's been on MSNBC. He's consulted with the History Channel, with BBC. He was the chief consultant to the Bible miniseries, if you saw that, by Mark Burnett. Incredible. So he's going to be with us next week, next time we get together. And then we're going to wrap up the series by looking at this. I can't believe in a God who leaves me feeling hopeless. Like, why, if God, even if all this is true, why do sometimes I just feel hopeless? And what does the Bible have to say about that? But today, what we're going to look at is this. I can't believe in a God whose followers and leaders are mostly hypocrites. Mostly hypocrites. A lot of you identified this. You're like, I don't even want to go to church. I don't like going to church because I think the church is filled with hypocrites. Now, I read every single response of the survey. There were almost 200, I think, of you who responded to that survey. And I pulled some quotes from you. These were all anonymous quotes. I don't know who said them. It might have been you, might have been someone else. But these are direct quotes of what you said. One of you asked this: why are Christians such hypocrites? Why don't Christians practice what they preach? My wife asks me that on a regular basis, so I think it's a very fair question. Why are Christians so messed up? Someone else said. How can Christians be so hypocritical? I mean, for some of you, you might be here because a friend invited you, or you're watching because somebody sent you the link. But like you don't like going to church because you think it's just a place filled with hypocrites. Someone else said it this way: people being hypocritical, I can handle. The ones who are the leaders are the ones I struggle with. And we'll look at that today. Why are leaders, why are church leaders like me, why are pastors, why are ministers, why are preachers, why are clergy so hypocritical? I agree it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And sometimes I phrase the question myself. In fact, this is a question I've asked myself numerous times in 2 decades of being a pastor, and I framed it this way. This is my question. Why are non-Christians sometimes better moral people than Christians? I've heard that from people, and at first I tried to defend it, and then I just thought, you know what? They're right. I have met non-Christians who are better moral people than me, and I have met non-Christians who are better moral people than some of the Christians I know. How do you answer that? And I mean, this is something we all struggle with. I'm the pastor of this church, and I am a hypocrite. That's true. If you don't believe it, just ask anybody who knows me. They will tell you. I don't always live up to the standards I believe. I haven't suffered from a massive headline moral failure, but there are times where I'm just judgmental. I don't actually if you've ever seen Christians, they'll often put a little fish symbol on their car. If you ever wonder what that is, it's like a Christian car. I don't have one because of the way I drive, all right? I just don't. It's like the way I drive will lead people away from God, not closer to God, if they realize I'm a Christian. So I don't even put one on my car. I don't do that. And there are times where I've had complete meltdowns. If you've been around Connexus for a while, you know that I am religiously opposed to camping. And there's a reason for that. I believe it's unchristian, and here's why. If there is a God and he created us smart enough to actually invent electricity and indoor plumbing and all that, then it is unfaithful to go back into the wild. True? It just makes sense to me. It's very logical. But years ago, our family used to go camping all the time when our kids were younger. I remember one vacation. We did it because, it's economical. It was what we could afford at the time and the whole deal. And so I never really wanted to go camping. I never really liked it. But I went. When our kids were 4 or 8 one year, we went up. I think it was just about an hour or two north of here. And so we went camping. And I was not a happy camper. I was the grumpy dad on this entire trip. And so we had borrowed and bought a lot of gear, and you're going to pack it all up. It's 10 times as much work to live outside as it is in the house. But anyway, I pointed that out to my family numerous times, but they didn't care. They all wanted to go camping. So off we went, my wife, Tony, my kids, and they're 4 and 8, and we go. And I'm trying to be a good sport. And I said, you know what's going to happen? We're going to get up there, it's going to rain. I was right. It rained. And it didn't rain. It just poured. So we had borrowed a dining tent. You ever seen those? It's like a great big tent where you can actually put a picnic table underneath it. And I thought, I have a dining room. I don't need a dining tent. We can just eat in our dining room at home. But I lost that argument. So anyway, there we are outside in the wild. It's pouring rain. I'm trying to make dinner. And the rain started to bulge up on the roof of the tent. You know how that happens, where it's almost flat and it started to come down? And I thought, wow, I got to save my family. So I thought, here's what I'll do. I'll go to the edge of the pole and I'll kind of push it out and move the rain. Well, I moved the rain directly onto my entire body. I was so angry. I was just soaked. It just all fell down on me. Now I'm in a terrible mood. There's mud everywhere. I'm a neat freak. I don't like this. And I'm like, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. My family's like, no, just stay. Let's just go to bed and we'll get up in the morning. So I get into the tent. The tent starts to leak. Like, oh no. And then the rain starts to pour in through the front door of the tent, if you can call it a door. My sleeping bag is wet. I am wet. And finally, I just snap. And I'm like, that's it. We are going home. Everybody in the car. I was that dad. I'm like, everybody in the car. We are driving home. They're like, no, we don't want to leave. It's like, get in the car. We're going home. That's my Christian witness to my family. So we start driving back 2 hours, and I'm not in a good mood. And then I realized, because we didn't have a church building at the time, I can't even go home because there's a Bible study happening at my house. And I thought, this is going to be great. I walk in raging mad to a Bible study. How's your vacation going? It's like, ooh, he's possessed by a demon. Look at him. Horrible. So I can't even go home. We have to go to a movie, soaking wet. And then finally, all the Bible study people leave. So I sneak in to my house at 11 o'clock that night. That's just life. And I met non-Christians who are better than that. Why? Why? Why are non-Christians sometimes better moral people than Christians? Well, let's look at that. I mean, if you have an assumption about morality, and I'm going to assume you have an assumption about morality, because if you have a view or an opinion on hypocrisy or morality, there is an assumption underneath that. So I want to try to unearth that. What is your assumption about morality? And I've thought about this quite a bit, and I think if you're not accessing this from a Christian perspective, or even Christians would believe this as well, but I think this is an all skate. Most of us think morality is about self-reliance, right? The reason you're mad at Christians, the reason you're mad at pastors, the reason you're mad at people who say one thing and do another is you're like, well, come on, you just need to get over that. You need to go get some counseling. Actually, I did go get some counseling after that. I thought, what kind of person have I become? And I went to a counselor and talked about it and, tried to work through that. But you're like, you Christians just need to be more self-aware. You Christians, you just need to be more self-reliant. You don't need God. You can just become a better person. And I think self-reliance gets you somewhere. I think self-reliance can help. In fact, sometimes I think people use their faith as an excuse for irresponsibility. I think sometimes it's like, well, if God wants to make me a different person, he can make me a different person. Sometimes I'm like, look in the mirror and just become a different person. Like, you can take responsibility for your actions. I get that. But underneath that attitude is this idea of self-reliance. Now, self-reliance is actually not the Christian assumption about morality. And some of you know that self-reliance has its limits. Because you've gotten far with self-reliance, but some of you have fallen into the grips of an addiction that you realized was more powerful than you were, and your self-reliance didn't work. Some of you have a temper that seems bigger than your ability to control it, and self-reliance doesn't work. Some of you say, hey, I believe in truth, but the reality is you lie, and you don't know why you lie, and self-reliance isn't helping you. Now, in some things, you can self-rely, and you can be like, okay, I can read the 8 steps on how to treat people better or whatever, and you can, read that stuff, and you can get better. But there are some things that master you, and fortunately for us, Christianity never thinks morality is about self-reliance. In fact, the heart of Christianity is not self-reliance, it's Christ-dependence. It's saying after a camping trip meltdown like this, oh my goodness, there is something bad that lives in me, even as a Christian, and I need help to master this thing that's bad inside me, right? Some of you walk down the aisle and it's like, we're going to love each other forever. And 6 months later, it's nuclear war. And you don't know why. And you're like, okay, I did everything I know how to do. And Christianity says, well, good, your morality was never about you anyway. It's about depending on Jesus, and Jesus is the one who remakes us. See? So if that's your assumption about morality, that it's self-reliance, that is not Christian understanding. Let's take that a little bit further. What's your assumption, not just about morality, but about Christianity? What do you think Christianity is about? Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, what do you actually think becoming a Christian is about? This is what a lot of us believe, inside the church and outside the church, that Christianity makes good people better. That's why you would become a Christian. It's like, well, you're a bad person, you need to become better. And if you become a Christian, hopefully you'll become a better person. Did you know that's actually not what Christianity is about? Christianity is not about making good people better. And if it was, this is why some of you are like, I am a good person. I don't need to become a Christian to become a good person. I'm better than a lot of the Christians I know. And on a relative scale, you might be right. I would give you that one. I would agree with you. But Christianity doesn't make good people better. Now, we could ask that question, okay, well, what does Christianity do? And we'll get to that. But the other question we'd have to ask is, well, what do you mean by good? Like good compared to your deadbeat brother-in-law? Maybe. You're good. Good compared to that guy at work who never shows up and is fundamentally lazy? Yeah, you're probably good. Good next to your neighbor 3 doors down? Yeah, probably good. Good compared to the people in prison? Yeah, maybe you're good. Good compared to Mother Teresa? Oh, I'm not quite Mother Teresa. Good compared to Gandhi? How about good compared to Jesus? See, Christianity doesn't exist to make good people better. You know what it exists to do? It exists to make dead people live. That is the heart of Christianity. When we baptize people, the symbol behind it is you died, sin killed you, and you are risen to life. What does that mean? Well, all of us, the one thing none of us can conquer is death. Nobody's figured that one out. We believe that Jesus came to give us a restored relationship with God in all of eternity, here and now and forever. And that really, when I really look inside, when I'm really honest, if I'm really self-reflective, if I'm actually self-aware, I realize that there is a problem in my life that makes for meltdowns on camping trips, that makes me selfish in relationships, and that there is something fundamentally dying and decaying inside me. And you know that. If you've ever come to the end of yourself, you know that. And Christianity didn't say, well, you're a decent person. We're going to make you, we're going to move you from a 6 to an 8 or a 7 to a 9. Christianity said, hey, compared to what God created in this life, because we all know something's fundamentally wrong with this world, we're all dead. And Jesus has come to make us alive. He has come to bring the dead back to life, because I believe everybody spends forever somewhere. And Jesus is the difference about whether you spend it with God or apart from God, that God honors our choices into eternity. And he has come to make the dead live, to make me a new creation, to make you a new creation, and to say, Carrie, you can't do this by yourself, but I will come and live in you. Christianity doesn't make good people better, it makes dead people live. Well, you say, that's good, but let's get back to the big issue. What about hypocrisy? What about hypocrisy? Are you just trying to let all Christians off the hook here? Well, I don't think so. So here's the reality. If you're not somebody who follows Jesus, if you're not somebody who embraces Christianity, I'm just going to assume that you're a moral person. I'm going to assume that you are doing your best. I'm going to assume that you are trying hard. And I'm going to make, sometimes the way Christians treat non-Christians is horrible, because we just assume the only people who are moral people are Christians. Wrong. I know so many, in fact, every single non-Christian person I've ever met, whether they just are not sure what they believe, or they're an atheist, or they subscribe to another religion, they have a moral standard. They have a moral standard. So if you're not a Christian, you actually have a moral standard. You do. You have certain beliefs, and you're like, thank you for acknowledging that, because you do. You don't believe it's right to lie. You believe in the truth. You don't believe it's right to hate. You believe in love. You don't believe it's right to take revenge. You believe in forgiveness. And you say to yourself, I don't have to be a Christian to believe in those things, and you're right. You actually have a moral standard, but the issue in hypocrisy is this. You have a moral standard. Have you kept it? Have you kept it? Have you kept your moral standard? And your moral standard may be different than other people's moral standard. You might think it's higher than Christian moral standards. You might think it's just different than Christian moral standards. But you have a moral standard. The question is, have you kept it? Or have you fallen short? Because you believe in love, but there are times where you've hated. And you know, the opposite of love isn't hate. Do you know what the opposite of love is? Indifference. There have been times where you've been indifferent. You have a moral standard. Have you kept it? You believe in the truth. Have you ever lied? You know, you said to your 8-year-old, I'm going to be home for dinner. And you worked straight through till 9 o'clock. You've got a moral standard. Have you kept it? And whatever your moral standard is, whether it's a Christian moral standard or another moral standard, I think most of us would have to say the answer to this question is no, not always. There's a gap between what we intend to do and what we actually do, how we hope to live and how we actually live. And Christians struggle with the same thing you struggle with. I've got a moral standard. I don't always keep it. You've got a moral standard. It may be better than my moral standard, but you don't always keep it. Well, if that's true, and I think if you're really being honest, you'd probably have to admit, yeah, that's true. I haven't kept my own moral standard. Then I kind of think this is true, this next idea. That the only people who call hypocrites hypocrites are hypocrites. I just wanted to use hypocrite a lot in the same sentence. But think about that. The only people, if you have not kept your moral standard, even if you're not a Christian, if you are a Christian or you're not, if you have not kept your moral standard, then that makes you a hypocrite. And so really, the only people who call hypocrites hypocrites are hypocrites. I'm a hypocrite. Because if I call you a hypocrite and I say, well, you haven't lived up to your moral standard or God's moral standard, neither have I. And even if you don't believe in God's moral standard, from the outside looking in, you're like, well, I have a moral standard. It's my personal moral standard, but have you kept it? No. Well, then you're a hypocrite. Hypocrite actually, I mean, in English, we use it to mean people who say one thing and live another way or do another thing. They don't practice what they preach. But it's actually a transliterated Greek word that comes directly from the Bible and from Greek culture. And what it means mask or costume or play actor. And so if you were in a dramatic production, you would put on a costume or a mask, and then you were a hypocrite. And so it came to be used of religious people who were like, hey, you're wearing a mask. That's not who you really are. You say you forgive, but you hate. You say you have this standard, but you live down here. And we've just kind of used that and adopted it. And the reality is we kind of all are. We all are. Now, I want to take you into a story from the Bible. This is from John chapter 8, where Jesus is at church. And he walks into a situation where somebody is caught sinning. And the issue of hypocrisy comes up. Watch this. At dawn, this is first thing in the morning of the Sabbath, he appeared again in the temple court. So you know that like Saturday night, it would have been Friday night, but Saturday night has just ended. And you know what goes on Saturday night, all kinds of crazy. Where all the people gathered around him and he sat down to teach them. So he's at church, lots of people are not at church. And look at this, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They found her having sex with someone she wasn't married to. They opened the hotel room door and it's like, woo, look what we found, okay? They made her stand before the group. So they're like, not only did we see this, you're coming with us. And we're going to take you to church. Now, why would they do that? They would do that because in the Old Testament, the part of the Bible about Jesus, any Jewish person caught having sex with someone they weren't married to had to die according to the Old Testament law. And they died by one of two ways. If you weren't married, you would die by strangulation. They would strangle you. Apparently that was more merciful than the other option. If you were married, and this was probably a married woman with a married man, it was an affair, they stoned you. They took stones and they threw them at you until you were dead. That's why the stones you have are smaller and non-fatal. But they were big. So they made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." I mean, she's wearing a bed sheet. She's wearing a bathrobe. She's got his t-shirt on, covers her down to here, and she's in church. In the law, in the Old Testament, that part of the Bible that you claim, because you say you're from God, right? Okay, but you really love people and you're this like mercy guy. So we want to set you up. This is the religious leaders of the day, so that you're in an impossible bind. You either go against the law of God and forgive her, and then you're clearly not from God, or you stone her to death, but that seems to violate your personal morality. So like we got you trapped here. Look, we found her in the act of adultery. There's no debate. There's no facts of the case here. She loses. We got her. Don't know where the guy went. They just found the woman. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? And see, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him, because the religious leaders, my equivalent in Jesus' day, didn't like Jesus. Most of them didn't. They felt threatened. They were insecure. They didn't actually speak for God. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger, triggering a debate among biblical scholars that's raged for thousands of years. What did he write? It doesn't say. People have all kinds of theories. I think it was a secret formula for Coke. That's sort of my theory. Or how do they get the caramel in the caramel bar? I don't know. Nobody has any idea what he wrote. Nobody has any idea. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. It's a good point. He's saying, those of you who are so angry, those of you who are so righteous, those of you who are like, whoa, I got a moral standard that's better than hers, and we caught her, and let's get her. You got a moral standard? You ever violated it? Then throw the first stone. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older ones first. Why? Because they were going for the parking lot? No. Because age in that culture was synonymous with wisdom. And they kind of realized as they held the stones, oh, that's not me. That's not me. And so they left. And one by one, people caught on, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Now, what's so ironic about this story is the only one who was without sin was Jesus. He actually had the right to throw the stone. He had a moral right to. I believe he never sinned. I know that's pushing at it for some of you, but I think that's true. He was a righteous man. And if you can't believe that, was Jesus more righteous than you? Probably. So Jesus straightened up, and this is so powerful if you've ever wondered where you stood with God, whether what you did last night, what you did last week, what you did all those years ago, what you keep on doing is forgivable, because some of you think it isn't. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. Then look at what Jesus says to her, and this is what Jesus says to you. This is the heart of Christianity. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. The one who had every right to throw the stone didn't. But he didn't leave her there. He said, "Now go and leave your life of sin." He said to me, okay, after a family meltdown like that one, I'll forgive you, but don't go out and do it again. Get to the root of that. Why are you that way? I can help you with that. It is not self-reliance, it's Christ-dependent. And Jesus says, I'm forgiving you so that it can be different. Because something drove you to seek solace in a guy who's probably just going to disappoint you, and so many of you have been there. He's just going to disappoint you. You're looking for something he can't give you. But I can. And I won't use you the way he will. The only people, this is what the story means to me, who call hypocrites hypocrites are hypocrites. Now, you want a surprise because you think, okay, I'm mad at hypocrisy. I'm mad at hypocrisy in the church. I don't like pastors who are hypocrites. I don't like Christians who are hypocrites. You know what the surprise of the gospel is? God is more critical of hypocrites than you are. Surprise, surprise, he is. I could have gone to Matthew chapter 23. It's one of the gospels that tells the story of Jesus' life. And if you want to see how angry God is, and Jesus specifically is, at people who are hypocrites, I want you to read Matthew 23. He is fuming at them. And that's true of leaders. You're like, what about leaders? You let yourself off the hook. God is more critical of hypocrites than you are, and he's more critical of leaders than you are. In fact, the Bible tells us very specifically when it comes to leaders like me who lead churches, he will judge them. God is going to judge us. Look at what it says as Paul is writing to the early church, and he's trying to explain this Christianity, this different way of thinking about God and humanity that people are trying to get their heads around. He was saying to the early church, which was gathered like we're gathered today, he said, now listen, Christians, not many of you should become teachers. Not many of you should do what I do, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. I actually have a different moral standard than most Christians, and it's higher, and God will judge me. Now, that doesn't mean I shouldn't be accountable to human authority. I am accountable to our elders and to our lead pastor, Jeff Brody. I'm accountable to him, and they need to hold me to a tight level of accountability. But deeper than that, I'm actually accountable to God, and I actually believe that's real, and I actually believe I have to give an answer for how I've lived my life. I'm going to be judged more strictly. And so will every religious leader. You know. Now, does that excuse irresponsible behavior? Absolutely not. And in fact, if you have been hurt by the church or you have been hurt by pastors, I want to apologize to you today. And if I have specifically hurt you as a religious leader, I apologize. And we want to make it right. And we need to. But even deeper than that, God will make it right. And I'm accountable. So ask yourself, well, what should I do? In light of all this, what should I do? First of all, don't go into ministry. Now you know, okay? Don't do that. No, here's the big thing. Decide whether you qualify to throw stones. Do you qualify? Do you qualify? You have a moral standard, whether you're a Christian or not. Have you kept it? Because that's the qualification to throw a stone. So you need to decide. Another thing you can do is change your perspective. Well, how will those of us who are in the church relate to each other and relate to the world? See, this was a live issue in Jesus' day, because the Old Testament was never intended to be this way, but by the time Jesus came along, the religious leaders had basically turned it into a self-reliant religion. I'm better than you. I read my Bible more than you. I give more than you. I'm more righteous than you, even though I'm not, but I'm just going to pretend I am. And everybody said, well, I'll never be as good as those people or as good as they think they are, so I'm just going to give up. And Jesus came and said, don't give up. Why not experience forgiveness? And why not allow my grace at work in your life? And why not, through me, become a new creation? And Paul says, look at this. As he's explaining this to the early church in the book of Colossians, he says, therefore, Christians, are you trying to figure this out? Good, because I am too. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, how does God feel about you? He loves you. What does he think about your sin? He's offering you forgiveness. What does he think about those times you've fallen short? He wants to make you into a new creation through Jesus. And as a result of that, because you are chosen, holy, and dearly loved, clothe yourselves, Christians, with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, I want you to be forgiven. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So my primary disposition as a follower of Jesus and as a leader, when someone sins against me, is to forgive them. Is to say, I've also received forgiveness at the foot of Jesus. Please forgive me as I forgive you. You know what it's like? And I know this is going to be really hard because most of us were raised in Canada in the West and in a prosperous culture, but I want you to imagine you're in a refugee camp, the kind of camp we read about almost daily in the news. And I want you to imagine that you're 2 days from starvation. If you really want to understand what Paul is getting at here, and I want to imagine that you and your family are going to die in 2 days of starvation, and you think it's over. And then suddenly the UN plane flies overhead and it lands. And the UN workers get out and food arrives and aid arrives and help arrives. And you barely have the strength to get in line, but you happen to be first in line. And as the workers bring food, you're the first to receive it. Now, what's your posture? Gratitude because it didn't depend on you. Did you do anything to earn that? You didn't do anything to earn that. So why on earth would you be anything but grateful? That is the gospel. That is what Jesus did for us. You know what judgmental, self-righteous hypocrisy is? It's like you being the first in that line. You got 2 days of energy left, but for that food, which you just received as a gift. And then you turn around immediately and look at the person behind you in line, and you say to the person in line, how come you don't have food like I do? Look at me. Look at my family. That's what hypocrisy is. I'm just a beggar who got grace. I'm a sinner who got forgiven. I'm a sinner who's been loved. So forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. So where does this leave us? Well, if you're going to cast stones, be clear in your mind before God why you have that right. And then act accordingly. If you've never breached your moral standard, whatever it is, cast it. But I think that'll leave you where it leaves me, that the only people who call hypocrites are hypocrites. So what do you do? Well, you got a stone when you came in. And if you're watching online, I just want to encourage you probably don't have a stone nearby, but just grab an object that you can write on, even a piece of paper. You also got a Sharpie. I want you to take the stone in your hand wherever you are at our locations or watching. And I want you to take the Sharpie, and this might take you a few minutes, but I want you to think about the name of the person you are most angry at right now, who you think is the hypocrite of hypocrites, the one that you can't forgive, the one that you can't stand. And maybe it's a religious leader, maybe it's a church you were part of, maybe it's someone in authority, maybe it's your ex, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your dad, maybe it's your son, maybe it's your daughter. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a friend you used to have who betrayed your trust. Who is it? And I want you to write their name on the stone. And then if you think you don't have the right to throw the stone, then I want you to drop it. That's how we're going to end the service today. We're going to drop the stone. After I pray, I'm going to give you an opportunity. There'll just be a quiet piano in the background to write the name, or maybe it needs to be the initials because the person is right next to you. Or a pseudonym. It's between you and God. It's not between us. And then today, here's how we're going to end the service. Right at the front, before you go, there's an area where you can drop the stone. And if you haven't got the right to throw it, then leave it here. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Because that's what I'm going to do with mine. Let's pray. Father, I just pray you would bring someone to mind that we feel superior to, that we feel better than. I've breached my moral standard, and I have breached yours. And I'm a hypocrite. And I'm forgiven, and I'm loved enough not for you to leave me that way, but to call me into new life and to rebuild me so I don't have meltdowns like that all the time. And Father, I just thank you that you continue to work on us, that you continue to chisel away at stone hearts, that you love us, but we don't love well. We don't love others. We hate. We grow indifferent. We grow cold. We don't forgive the way you have been forgiven. We receive the aid, and then we turn around and judge the people who haven't got it. And Lord, just forgive us, forgive us, forgive us. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his life, for his message, for his salvation. And I just pray you would give us the courage, if we feel unqualified, to throw the stone, to write someone's name. And then as we exit today, to come forward first and drop it. In Jesus' name.